unbelievable influence on the politicians who are steeped in the ideology of both parties. And once again, I go back to this. If I should run for president, I am not in bed with any party. I am not in bed with any special interest. All I'm trying to do is one thing: walk in the shoes of the American.
Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It's Thursday, February 7th, 2019. My name is Michael Brooks, and I'm Michael Thursday, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, Kate Aronoff, fellow at Type Media Center, contributing writer for the Intercept, as well as the Jacobin magazine. We're talking about the for real, no BS Democratic Socialist plan for a Green New Deal, and also why it's time to press criminal charges against fossil fuel executives. Trump makes a last-ditch pitch on the border wall, doubling down again, as he always will, on white nationalism. Virginia Democratic Attorney General says he also wore blackface. What the F is going on with Virginia? Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax of Virginia has retained Brett Kavanaugh's law firm as allegations about a sexual assault emerge. Senator Amy Klobuchar, well, her proposals are boring, but apparently her treatment of her staff is not. She can't find, apparently, someone to manage her presidential bid because of stories about what a monster she is to work for. Another horrifying miscarriage of justice in Brazil. President Lula given another 12 years on another property he didn't own, and there was no records connecting him to for kitchen renovations. This comes about a week after an exorcism done in his office, and that was within days of not being allowed to go to his brother's funeral, as this corrupt judiciary and fascist government in Brazil, backed by the United States, tries to erase and destroy the legacy of Brazil's most important president. House Intelligence Chair announces sweeping investigation into Trump's finances in Russia. Yeah, I wonder if they will find things. Justice Department reopens, is opening a probe into Jeffrey Epstein, the financier convicted of child sexual predation, who has connections to Donald Trump, Alan Dershowitz, Prince Andrew, former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, and of course, Donald Trump's labor secretary. Apparently, he's not part of the inner circle. Germany makes moves to restrict Facebook's data mining. May heads back to Brexit as she continues to fail to figure out how to handle Brexit. Mike Pompeo talks nonsense about Hezbollah in Venezuela as the Maduro government refuses humanitarian aid. And a whole bunch more on today's Majority Report. We should have taken a picture last night. I realize.
I feel like we say that every year.
We always say that every time we do our annual Majority Report dinner. But by the time we have to take Sam by the arms and escort him out of the restaurant, we're usually post-picture.
After the second bottle of red wine.
Yes. Like, does anybody want more red wine? And we're all like, yeah. I mean, if you're buying, sure. And then Brendan's like, no, I am eating fish. Pardon.
Yeah, Sam really let me have it.
There was like a New England etiquette fight going on between like bizarre nonsense between Brendan and Sam last night. Yeah.
Sam apparently doesn't eat freshwater fish.
Freshwater fish, no.
Brackish, I'll eat it with brackish is fine.
Brackish is okay. Oysters, you never know where they came from. You just suck them right out. What, freshwater fish? Freshwater fish is the lavender of the sea. Oh, my God. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was snubbed by Nancy Pelosi, who had some very just boring, dull comments about the Green New Deal today, which is, or yesterday. Everybody supports it, but nobody knows what it is. Well, we're going to explain precisely not only what it is, but the contours around it with Kate Aronoff, who's one of the probably, I would say, the leading journalist of this in the game in a few minutes. And the leading politician of the Green New Deal is, of course, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She was on, did an extended interview with NPR and Steve Inskeep that came out just, I believe, either yesterday during All Things Considered or today for Morning Edition. I'm not sure. Maybe I should look at my sound sheet. Morning Edition. So it came out today. Here she is. She gets the, you expect to get the how are you going to pay for it question, yada, yada, yada. But this isn't really important, actually, because not only does she parlay this question, but this is actually a broader argument she gets into here, which I know that, this is where the MMT stuff is really important for how we discuss policy making. This is AOC talking about how to pay for a Green New Deal.
You're talking about things that obviously would cost a lot of money. Mm-hmm. I know you'd rather think of it as an investment rather than a cost, but it is just certainly a lot of money. You don't specify where it's going to come from other than saying it will all pay for itself.
Yeah, I think the first thing that we need to do is kind of break the mistaken idea that taxes pay for 100% of government expenditure. It's just not how government expenditure works. We can recoup costs, but oftentimes you look at, for example, the GOP tax cut, which I think was an irresponsible use of government expenditure, but government projects are often financed by a combination of taxes, deficit spending, and other kinds of investments, bonds and so on.
Well, I get that, but deficit spending is borrowing money that has to be paid back eventually through taxes.
Yeah, and I think that is always the crux of it. So when we decide to go into the realm of deficit spending, we have to do so responsibly. We ask, is this an investment or is this actually going to pay for itself?
So you're saying borrow the money, make the investment, the economy will grow, we'll pay off the debt.
Absolutely, because we're creating jobs.
Although I do have to say, you mentioned the Republican tax cut. They said the same thing about the tax cut. Let's do this tax cut, the economy will grow, it's going to be great, it's going to pay for itself. Hasn't turned out to be true at all.
Absolutely. And I think that is an important distinction to make, because when they were advancing that cause, they had no evidence to say that these things were going to happen. But we actually do have the evidence. For every $1 invested in infrastructure, we get $6 back.
Okay, so look, she's absolutely right on the merits. There's no doubt that particularly if you have control over your own currency and spending, you can do these types of moves. And this is actually, as Zach Carter points out, this is one of the things that sort of broke the brains of the 90s consensus, because through several cycles now, there's been this, oh my God, the deficit's going to come and we're going to pay the price. There was a whole scam that threw off the economic recovery after Wall Street melted the economy in 2008, of people all of a sudden saying we needed to go into austerity. In fact, the United States had a bit of a better recovery, in fact, a much better recovery than the European Union, because of even just an incredibly modest stimulus package that the Obama administration pushed through before, unfortunately, acquiescing to austerity themselves. The Eurozone sunk their whole economy through austerity, and of course, seriously practiced, just vicious cruelty on Greece. So she's absolutely right on the merits, and also in terms of the more narrow question, yes, how many more jets can oligarchs buy? That has diminishing returns. If you put money into normal people's pockets and create jobs, it has it has a stimulative effect. That's the stat on put in one, get six out. Now, it's frankly a boring, annoying question that we already sort of know the answer to. But look, whatever. NPR is going to ask that question. They're going to ask how you pay for it. What is actually pretty unacceptable journalistic malpractice is to draw the equivalency between Republicans talking about their top-end tax redistribution and investing in energy infrastructure and generating a new economy. We know empirically those two things are not comparable. You could even, on far ends of comparison here, you could even just look at the results of the Obama 2009 stimulus as well as the Trump tax giveaway or the Bush tax giveaway, and you could see these things had very different effects in terms of bang for your buck. So the fact that that is still a talking point, I don't think you'll ever get to a point, and frankly, I don't know that you should. As much as I might roll my eyes at the question, I think, how are you going to pay for it? Okay, that question will continue. The equivalency between investing in transforming our energy infrastructure and the massive social, economic, and ecological benefits of that versus yet another tax giveaway, when even Bill Clinton was sort of explaining that trickle down didn't work in the 90s relative to Reagan and Bush tax cuts, that's ridiculous. Like, NPR just needs to update their style guide on that.
Also, we're never going to just pay the debt.
Never. No, nor should we. That would be it's really bad.
Yeah, but it's somehow implicit in a lot of these questions. Like, well, someday we're going to need to, balance the books on this. Maybe not.
There's not going to be a day where the President of the United States and the Premier of China sit down and the President writes a check for $3 trillion from the Treasury, and they both are just like, all right, it was nice doing business with you. We'll go back to our respective spheres of influence. That's not how it works. That's not how the economy or international relations works. And also, if you want to talk about coming to a head with debt, I'm far less concerned about government debt, but you do need to, for countries that have been systemically exploited in the global system through histories of colonialism, imperialism, or through austerity and abuse today, so this could be anywhere from Haiti to Ukraine, you need to have massive debt relief. You need to have a jubilee for the entire African continent. You need to have a jubilee for great parts of Latin America, Asia, Eastern Europe. And there also needs to be mass public debt forgiveness, as an example, in the form of student loans in the United States. Everybody's student loans in the United States should be erased. Would have huge economic benefit and, of course, be the right thing to do. So if you want to have like a come-to-a-head conversation about debt, I'm all for it. Let's talk about all the debts we need to erase and forgive so we don't have a loan shark economy anymore. Today's show is in part brought to you by the Calming Comfort Blanket. There's no need to suffer through another sleepless night thanks to the Calming Comfort by Sharper Image. The luxurious weighted blanket is made with super soft velveteen material designed with high-density comfort to fill and to promote a sense of calmness. Plus, by applying an even amount of pressure over your body, Calming Comfort helps the production of serotonin and melatonin and mimics the soothing feeling of being hugged for a restful night's sleep. I'll say I've actually tried this blanket, and I have always had a really hard time falling asleep. I just sort of, lay there, roll around, think about stuff. There's so much going on. When I have started using this thing, I think it has cut my fall asleep time by half. And then I'm out like a light. It's incredibly chill, calming, and is in fact calming comfort. The Calming Comfort blanket comes with a 90-day anxiety-free, stress-free, best night's sleep of your life guarantee from Sharper Image. And right now, our listeners can go to calmingcomfortblanket.com and use promo code MAJORITY at checkout to receive $15 off of this displayed price. Again, that's calmingcomfortblanket.com, promo code MAJORITY, because you can't put a price on a great night's sleep. calmingcomfort.com, promo code MAJORITY. Thursday's Valentine's Day, folks. Get your head in the game. Actually, Shari's berries they're delicious. You could have their chocolate strawberries at any time. If you can muscle Sam out of the way. He's like, yang, 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 yang. You can never go wrong. I did last year, made some Shari's berries orders. It was a great idea. They were well received by all, including my mom. You can never go wrong with Shari's Berries signature dipped Valentine strawberries dipped in milk, dark, or white chocolatey goodness for any discerning palate, and topped with decadent chocolate chips and heart and glitter sprinkles. Your Valentine will fall in love with every bite. They are the perfect companion to a candlelight dinner, a bouquet of flowers, or a night on the town. They ship anywhere nationally, and they always arrive fresh with 100% Shari's Berries guarantee. It is amazing how fresh they are, because you do just kind of think in your head like these things are being shipped. They're strawberries. They're the freshest strawberries I've tasted that don't come directly off. You don't just pick directly. They're incredibly fresh and delicious. Valentine's Day is right around the corner, so send your Valentine the gift of their dreams at the price of your dreams, starting at just $19.99 plus shipping and handling. Order now and make this Valentine's really special by adding a dozen red roses for just $19.99 more. Shipped with your Shari's Berries at no extra charge. Just go to berries.com, click on the microphone, and enter code CEDAR, SEDER, at checkout. That's BERRIES.com. Click the microphone, enter code CEDAR, order today. Folks, we're going to take a brief break, and we'll be right back with Kate Aronoff. Welcome back. Michael Brooks here on the Majority Report. Joining us now is Kate Aronoff. She is a fellow at the Type Media Center and a contributing writer at the Intercept. She's also just written and co-edited this series for the Jacobin magazine on the foundations of a Green New Deal. Kate, thanks for being here. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for doing this. So let's start with the Green New Deal's 5 freedoms. This is one of several pieces that you and your co-authors put out in the Jacobin magazine. What are the 5 freedoms of the Green New Deal?
So, sort of following in the mold of FDR's 4 freedoms, we laid out 5 that are really sort of set for the 21st century and the various crises that we face. And so those are freedom from fear, freedom from toil, freedom to move, freedom from domination, and the freedom to live. So the sort of crux tying all of those things together is that, you know, the climate crisis is often talked about this thing that we can only sort of defeat if we sacrifice so many things, if we, you know, give up hamburgers and vacations and the sort of things that make our lives so wasteful and carbon intensive. But what we think is that that actually really breaks down a lot of the power relationships that are embedded in how this crisis has come to be. And so that plays out on the international level. So the United States and what are known as historical emitters are the most responsible for this crisis. But maybe even more so than that, fossil fuel companies are extremely responsible for this. About 100 companies exactly, have been responsible for 71% of global emissions since 1988. And so those fossil fuel executives, right, will have to give up some things. Very, very wealthy individuals who take frequent plane trips between London and New York, for instance, as many bankers do, who live hugely carbon-intensive lifestyles, they'll have to sacrifice some things, right? But for the rest of us, life can actually get much better. And so what we lay out in sort of, you know, supporting the sort of vision for a Green New Deal are these freedoms in the kind of way that most people's lives can really improve as we transition to a low carbon economy. So take something like freedom from fear. So, you know, we're already locked in for a certain amount of warming. We're probably on our way to about 1.3 degrees, no matter what we do. And that means more extreme temperatures. That means stronger storms. That means some level of sea level rise. And sort of what we put out is that nobody should have to fear that they won't, you know, have a roof over their head when that happens. That it won't be, that they won't be protected from those things. And moreover, that people should never live in fear of things like food scarcity or water shortages, or moreover from the kinds of racist, colonial, and sexual violence that sort of define and make so many people's lives so difficult. People shouldn't, you know, fear that if they have to leave their country, they'll face a militarized border and be interned in inhumane facilities as we're seeing along our southern border. Right. I can go into each of them, but you know,
so can I just I would. That's great, and maybe actually I would love another couple of examples because I love how it follows and expands on FDR. I think that's a really, really effective model for communicating this. But I think it's really important to really underline this kind of like critique of lifestyle politics that I feel like you're doing, and because for a couple of reasons. In my mind, at least. One, obviously, there's going to be changes, I think, you know, particularly, hopefully, in how we get around and move, right? Like a lot more public transportation, a lot less cars, a lot more density, and a lot more, you know, tighter communities and more efficiency and so on. But the frame that, you know, we have this, like, cataclysmic global crisis, and the answer is that you, individual consumer, should buy more recycled goods, eat less meat, and as always, I always have to stipulate, I'm not critiquing these things. I buy recycled goods. I'm not a vegetarian, but I certainly don't eat that much meat, and the ones I do is, organic and so on. And I understand people have a million responses to those things, but my point being is I'm not leveling a critique in anybody's personal choices. I think that's great. But I do think that the frame that any of your personal choices are going to in any way really fundamentally deal with this crisis is just absurd on its face. Connected to which the rhetoric of lifestyleism actually does correlate with evading the fundamental questions that we have to ask about inequality and capital that contribute to this crisis. And then I just want to put on the table too, it also does start to kind of manifest in sick ways. Like if it's all just about your kind of individual output, well, an oligarch, I think this is basically a scam, but sure, I took a private jet, but I bought carbon offsets to plant trees in Swaziland, so I'm fine. Now you, on the other hand, poor person in the Bronx or Mumbai, you should use less air conditioning during the heat wave because we have a climate crisis. And that actual synthesis of the covering up of the inequality and capital dynamics behind the climate crisis with an emphasis on lifestyleism starts to get really clear, I think, in those contrasting examples of the kind of social and economic pathologies that they put forward.
Yeah, I think you said it exactly right. And I don't think we can understand how this rhetoric plays out in the climate world without sort of understanding the last 30 to 40 years of history in which neoliberalism has really done a good job at convincing people that, as Margaret Thatcher said, there's no such thing as society. And so, in this focus on individual responsibility for everything, we hear similar rhetoric around poverty. It's like if you are in poverty, it's because you didn't work hard enough, right? And it's that kind of logic extended in, maybe more subtle ways to the climate. And it's just as absurd, right? Just like, people often can't get a job because the economy doesn't want to give them a job. Often people consume because the economy structures the way that they consume, right? And so I don't think it's really useful to shame people for eating meat or for even going on vacation or something and taking a plane that they find a ticket for that's really cheap when they've never traveled out of the country or something. Like I don't think it's really useful to shame people for that, especially when we haven't created really robust alternatives. And again, I think the key point, as you said and I said earlier, is that this really just covers up so many power relationships and the really sort of absurd way in which responsibility for this crisis is concentrated in such a small number of very, very wealthy people and industries.
Yeah, and I would just also, I think I would add, we'll get back to maybe a couple of other examples of these freedoms, which you outlined so well, but I would also add, having children to that list, right? Because you look at the history, going back particularly to like the 70s and how ideas from like the population bomb and stuff were applied to trying to shrink population growth in Africa and Asia. And he's just like, the rhetoric was horrifying. And the context enormously disturbing on these highly exploited continents to say, well, yeah, but the real answer is you should have less kids. But even down to today, that every kind of, lifestyle politics article about like, well, I'm lessening my carbon footprint by not having a kid is actually just sweeping under the rug. And I know, there's been pieces published about this in the Jacobin recently, just like actually the fact that there's a horrific hole in the safety net for young families. For regardless of whatever reasons people are having kids. And it's a way in which this stuff is actually getting marshaled to justify bad punitive policies in general and actually undermine the basic decency and well-being that everybody should have.
Yeah, I don't think I can say it any better than that, but I would just add that, this is a really sort of convenient line for fossil fuel companies. It's a really convenient line for the people who actually hold responsibility for this crisis to sort of cast that off and talk about these sort of, sustainability measures or whatever, whether that be banning plastic straws or up until having kids and talking about population and stuff. And I think, that just really sort of, whether it's fossil fuel executives who are saying it or not, really just does play into covering up their role in having known about this crisis for decades now, and not just sort of gone in the other direction and continued to do something they know is so bad for the planet and for the people on it, but actively funding disinformation campaigns to obscure the reality of that crisis and the findings of their own scientists.
What about freedom from toil?
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite ones that we included. I think something that doesn't get talked about enough when we talk about the Green New Deal is that people could probably work less. And so we have this idea, right, when we talk about green jobs, of people putting up wind turbines, putting up solar panels on homes. That's certainly all part of it. But I don't want to focus overly on how much. There is a lot of work to do, obviously, to create this transition. But if we set it up right, people can also work much shorter work weeks. And so, why is that? If you think about a lot of the work that people do in the country, it's not, it's not necessarily productive in any sort of like societally meaningful way. It's productive for corporate profits. But, there's no reason why if you are taking a job with under a federal job guarantee, for instance, and you're doing something like remediating wetlands, for instance, or you're hanging out with old folks, which is another thing that a federal job guarantee could do, or writing plays, that's both, hopefully labor that's less alienated. So it's things that are, improving your community that you can find value in. It's not just sort of producing widgets for so that a few corporate executives can profit. So I think that, is one way in which solving the climate crisis or mitigating the climate crisis helps to take away toil. But it's also that, people can have vacations and things. Like if you're working 20 hours a week, because we've decided as a society that we don't need to produce mountains of cheap junk and sell that cheap junk to people, then there's more time to, go to the beach, to take high-speed rail, which we will hopefully build as part of the Green New Deal, to go hang out with your friends in other cities. There's all this sort of realm of life that I think gets so sort of tragically lost under capitalism because people, are working too many jobs. The unemployment rate is low in the United States, but how much of that is people working, awful jobs, two or three jobs at a time, and so I think this is, a real sort of quality of life question, and that people can have a better quality of life, and there's no reason why in the United States, where we work so much more than so many other parts of the world, people can't sort of, have their 8 hours for what they will, as the old labor saying goes, or hopefully much more.
Definitely. It reminds me of a book, Wasted Lives by Zygmunt Bauman, where he drew the connection between, it's obviously you're in a more privileged position mostly, just as a kind of generic statement, if you have a job than if you don't. Obviously, there's different types of exceptions, right? If you're sitting on a bunch of income and not working. But overall, if you have a job, but he did draw this correlation just of the theme of wasted life. So whether you're totally grinded out and just, literally physically or emotionally destroyed by work, that's a way of sort of being grinded and wasted and discarded. And then there's also the overt waste and discard of, you are structurally useless in this system, which is the sort of structurally unemployed, right? And then also implicitly saying, right, because there's plenty of people who are, quote unquote unemployable, but they might actually have a lot of the assets and traits that you outlined in terms of being great mentors or good people to hang out in different community contexts or contribute art or contribute, all sorts of other forms of labor. So it also I love it because it's like you both decrease all of the trash work that we use to just create surplus for companies, but we also sort of open up a much bigger set of human capacities that we can harness.
Yeah, exactly. And it's such a sort of narrow realm of what we consider to be productive, right? In capitalism. And I think, as happened during the original New Deal, you can pay people to like put on great plays, for instance, and go around the country writing travel guides for different states. Like that was a Works Progress Administration program, and it's awesome. Like those travel guides still exist, and they're really fun to read. I think that's totally within the realm of the
great
Green New Deal.
Murals. I mean, sometimes you will just randomly see some like great building in upstate New York, and like, what? When did that happen? And it's like, oh, right, that was a New Deal thing. They paid people to do, just to create something that looked great and usually could serve some really excellent community purpose. The Nancy Pelosi said, I think yesterday, like, oh, everybody likes the New Deal, Green New Deal, but nobody knows what it is. And so, okay, I think we kind of do. But that being said, I mean, you point out that the Green New Deal rhetoric has been around for a long time. And maybe there's a socialist version of it. Maybe there's a kind of progressive-y version of it. Maybe there's a straight-up Bloombergian third-way version of it. AOC's unveiled her version today, but just broadly, so this term doesn't get lost, what are we looking for in terms of the details for a plan that really does carry out those 5 freedoms?
Yeah, so this 5-page resolution that Representative Ocasio-Cortez introduced along with Senator Markey, there's a lot in it. I'll go through the sort of policy highlights and then get into the politics of it. So the main goal is to get to meet 100% of the demand for power in the United States with clean, renewable, and zero emission energy sources, which is a goal that's in line with the scientific consensus on climate change, unlike a lot of other climate policy. This would provide all people in the United States with clean air and water, with healthy and affordable food, high-quality health care, affordable, safe, and adequate housing, and economic security. It would do things like create a federal job guarantee, as we were just talking about, massive infrastructure build-out, building efficiency upgrades, robust investment in public transit. It would ensure that in building up low-carbon infrastructure, we're not infringing on Indigenous people's land rights or abusing the power of eminent domain. It would provide a just transition and ensure a dignified quality of life for workers and communities that have historically relied on coal, oil, and natural gas jobs. I could go on. It's a 5-page resolution, so I won't list out everything. But really, sort of what this does is to set a standard for a Green New Deal and say, look, this isn't just a talking point. We're talking about very concrete things that we'd like to do. This isn't, the sort of most. This isn't the legislation that will be passed that implements the Green New Deal, right? Ocasio-Cortez had asked for a select committee on a Green New Deal, which Nancy Pelosi decided not to create, which would have spent a year looking at these sorts of proposals and coming up with that sort of detailed plan. And so that's something that folks are very interested in doing outside of Congress, and hopefully as much as possible sort of within Washington. But this sort of says to especially potential 2020 contenders who have said they all support a Green New Deal, this is what you're talking about. You can't just talk about a couple of renewable energy tax credits for a select group of entrepreneurs as a Green New Deal. You really have to be committed to this really wildly ambitious goal of getting to 100% renewable, clean, and zero emission power by 2030.
And it's about the public sector, and it's about democracy. It's not about like offloading it in these sort of like public-private partnerships to incentivize this or that. It's mobilizing our resources as a collective to achieve massive goals.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not opposed per se to private investment. It's not saying there can't be private capital as part of it.
Right.
But what it does assert, even sort of in the preamble, is say that the United States has done big things before, as they say, the federal government led mobilizations during World War II and the New Deal that created the greatest middle class the United States has ever seen. And we've done this before. Like, we can do this, and this is kind of what we want to be the principles of carrying that out.
We have a couple minutes left, and I think the corollary of this is another piece in Jacobin that you published. It's time to try fossil fuel executives for crimes against humanity. Make the case.
So I mentioned a bit of this earlier, but fossil fuel companies have known for a very, very long time, since as early as the late 50s, they have been doing research into the existence of climate change. And what they found, not too long after they started doing that research, was not only is this a massive problem, but a massive problem that will, create untold suffering for so many people, that our product is causing it. Our product has a massive role to play in this. Shell in the 80s found that they were responsible for 4% of greenhouse gas emissions. That's a figure that they identified. Mm-hmm. And so even with this knowledge, they were very, very active in pouring so much money into disinformation campaigns that we all know so well, that allow for think tanks to send out sort of climate-denying fact sheets to freshmen, everyone from sort of freshman state senators to senators in the Congress, and just blanketly deny the existence of climate change. And so all the while that they were doing that, they were continuing to dig up more fossil fuels, to explore for new reserves, and to lobby Congress against passing any sort of even common sense regulations on them, to tear up regulations where they did exist, and basically to give them a free rein, and to give them, the $20 billion a year they collect annually in subsidies in various forms. And so the industry has a clear knowledge that they have been causing this problem. They know, even beyond Exxon and Shell, who we have documentation proving that they knew this for a while, no one can deny the mass suffering that climate change will cause. No one can deny that the fossil fuel industry is causing it, and yet they continue to do that. And so under the Rome Statute, which sort of lays out what constitutes a crime against humanity, my case is that qualifies.
I agree with your case.
Well, thank you.
How are you going to pay for it, Kate? No, I'm just kidding. That's the real question is how are you going to pay for it? A lot of people are talking about the Rome Statute, but that requires additional court space at The Hague. So I'm Steve Inskeep. How do you pay for that? Kate Aronoff, I really appreciate your time. Check out all of the pieces on the Jacobin and follow all of Kate's work. Of course, we'll have links to her Twitter and all the other ways you can follow her. She's a fellow at the Type Media Center and a contributing writer at The Intercept. Kate, thanks a million for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
All right, folks, we are going to go to the fun half right quick. Become a member of the Majority Report today, majority.fm/become a member. That's how this show happens. JustCoffee.coop. You can check out our sponsorship page. There'll be links, in fact, to all of the sponsors of today's show that you can check out. And sorry, I got only two. Hold on.
Just before we get to that, Nancy Pelosi in this is the actual quote about the Green New Deal. She said, it will be one of several or maybe many suggestions that we receive. The Green Dream, or whatever they call it, nobody knows what it is, but they're for it, right? The Green Dream. And Natalie Shore points out
trash, man.
that underrated loathsome aspect of this is her intentional botching of the name.
Right.
She, this is Natalie speaking, so I'm not going to censor her. She fucking knows what it's called and is being willfully disparaging. Green New Deal explicitly evokes one of the most popular moments in presidential history.
Right.
Green Dream evokes childish nonsense.
That's precisely it.
Like as a Marco Rubio once said, she knows exactly what she's doing.
She knows exactly what she's doing. And it's really, and it's absolutely shameful. And, I think especially us, like, we've played and will continue to play it very fair with Nancy Pelosi. She's dominated Trump very well. A lot of the ire at the Democratic leadership, in a narrow sense, should be much more focused at Schumer than Pelosi. But the bottom line is, and this is really where it just comes down to like the stuff that should be just talked about a lot more. It's just politics. And her politics are different radically than our politics. And part of that is because of the money and the contributions that she gets. That is, I think actually some of the ways people talk about money in politics gets very simplistic. There's much bigger questions of really just existing in a marketplace. Some of it's maybe generational. Some of it's maybe temperamental. I don't know. I don't care. But there's been the substantive snubs, like not doing the subcommittee, and then there's the childish undermining of it, which you saw there. And, this is still in a context of people actually whispering that the most, any adjective you could throw, successful, dynamic, interesting, high profile, important, influential young politician in the country should be primaried. I mean, of course, it's not a direct comparison because President Obama was a centrist, but just on a pure media level, could you imagine if Barack Obama got into the Senate in 2004 and it was a very different thing. He was in the center of the party and he was de-emphasizing his media profile, but just how demented. Just could you imagine? Just like, oh, we should primary that guy. Totally, yeah. He's the most talented politician in the country. We should primary him. Of course, it's different with Ocasio-Cortez because of ideology and because she represents a different politics than the Democratic leadership. Some of it's also petty as fuck jealousy, and the idea that people are looking. And it would have to be, even if they got some decent local politician, although you really couldn't be decent. You'd have to be an absolute idiot to challenge her. You would have to front load that campaign with real estate and Wall Street money and just run on smears. And the fact that that's actually like a conversation in D.C., I don't want to exaggerate it, but you've heard enough of these ripples to know that it is actually a thing, not just something that one random idiot said and all the other sane people dismissed, shows how deep and insane the problem is, as does Pelosi's just loathsome comments about the Green New Deal. Of course, the Michael Brooks Show, you can become a patron at patreon.com/DMBS. Tune in, 7 o'clock, Thursday show tonight. We're back to Tuesday next week with Mark Blythe as the guest. Tonight, our guests are Jeffrey Halper from Israelis Against Home Demolition, and then Brianna Joy Gray. We're talking about State of the Union, Abrams, Sanders, but we're looking very specifically and pretty broadly at the Kamala Harris record, what's that is all about. Michael Brooks Show YouTube channel at 7 tonight. Get the whole thing, patreon.com/TMBS. Matt, Literary Hangover.
Yep, check it out, Literary Hangover.
Check out also Jamie's show, The Antifada. Okay. And we'll leave you with this. Calming Comfort by Sharper Image is the luxurious weighted blanket that's designed with high density comfort I'm going to just restart. Calming Comfort by Sharper Image is the luxurious weighted blanket that's designed with high density comfort fill to promote a sense of calmness for a restful night's sleep. The Calming Comfort blanket comes with a 90-day anxiety-free best night's sleep of your life guarantee from Sharper Image. And now our listeners can go to calmingcomfortblanket.com and use promo code MAJORITY at checkout to receive $15 off of the display price. That's $15 off the displayed price. Again, that's calmingcomfortblanket.com. Use promo code majority because you can't put a price on a great night's sleep. We'll see you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy, back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy, back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Almost says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
I am a total cunt.
Can we bring back DJ Danerky's song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danerky.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break for people.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder.
I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are
psych. Fuck them.
Almost says what?
What?
Almost says what?
Hell of a lot of bank. 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 Hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black.
See Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keep it at 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on, fuck them. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy.
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are back. Africans are black.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total
pussy.
I wanted Trump to come out to the State of the Union to Danerky's track, and then just have that play out.
The alpha males are back.
Yeah,
the alpha males.
The alpha, isn't that right, Mike? The alpha males, and they sure are back. There's some weird account on Twitter. I don't know what the story is behind it, but they apparently don't like Bernie Sanders, but they've been doing incredible work for Bernie Sanders. This is a clip from 1988.
89.
89.
It looks like February 3rd, 89.
Oh, excuse me. Okay, but they're talking about the 88 race, right? February 3rd, 1989. So this was on C-SPAN. Bernie Sanders, I believe, if this is 89, I think he was probably in between being mayor of Burlington and getting elected to the House. He was elected to the House, I think, in either 92 or 90. So this question is about the Jesse Jackson 1988 campaign. It's no secret, and again, a kind of funny irony of this attempt to, of a lot of the kind of smears and disingenuous narratives about Bernie Sanders. He did, in fact, strongly support Jesse Jackson's presidential run in the late 80s. Now, I don't think he, frankly, should get extra credit for it either. It's just, frankly, that he was a progressive leader, and Jesse Jackson ran the most progressive campaign. In fact, if you listen to some of the conversations I've done with Bill Fletcher Jr., who's just indispensable, and please everybody find Bill Fletcher Jr. Brilliant. I mean, really one of the most important people you could be reading and listening to today, both on this program and then much more specifically in an illicit history for TMBS of the Jesse Jackson campaign, which he worked on. We have actually outlined some of the ways in which the specific concepts of the Rainbow Coalition and ideas of that campaign, including, though, also, frankly, just some specific talents that Jesse Jackson has as a campaigner, Bernie didn't replicate as effectively as he could have done in 2016 and should in 2020 if he runs again. But that being said, of course he supported Jesse Jackson, and he'll explain why. And it appears to be that this is that really the account?
Yeah, never underscore Bernie. Not affiliated with any presidential candidate. Has 102 tweets, 27. It's following 27 people and has 45 followers. But this tweet has been viewed 124,000 times.
All right. Well, thank you, whatever the idiot behind this account is. I guess the angle they're going for here is Bernie's concern about the Democratic Party. But it's just a good time to remind everybody that Bernie Sanders was a strong supporter of Jesse Jackson.
Hard to find one anymore. And I want to know what you thought of Reverend Jesse Jackson's campaign, whether you agreed with most of those points that he was making. And I want to give you one little footnote that's of some interest, I think. My nieces had uncles on both sides of their families, their mothers and their fathers, named Eugene V, as in Victor.
Right. In Burlington, we had a real debate about our attitude toward Jesse Jackson's campaign. I think many of us were impressed by the positions that Jackson was bringing forth. We were deeply impressed by the concept of the Rainbow Coalition, which I believe is exactly what has to be done in this country. And we were impressed by Jackson's charisma and his going into the ghettos and into the poor areas and speaking for the family farmers who were being thrown off of their land. And that moved us very much. The problem that we had is that, of course, Jackson was functioning within the Democratic Party, and we're not Democrats. So we had a discussion within our own organization, and we ended up saying, yeah, we're not Democrats, but we think what Jackson was doing was so important that we are going to support him. And for one night in Vermont, we did go into the Democratic Party, and in fact, Jackson ended up winning the Democratic caucuses. So I was sympathetic to Jackson. I agree with the concept of the Rainbow Coalition. I do disagree with Jesse in terms of whether the Democratic Party can be the real vehicle for social change. I believe it should be a third party.
Well, of course, Bernie has sort of revised himself and actually ended up following Jesse Jackson's direction on that practically, even though he still is an independent. And they actually maintained a decent relationship. I don't recall whether Jesse Jackson stayed neutral in 2016, although I think he might have actually endorsed Bernie, although he also has a close relationship with the Clintons in spite of some enormously disrespectful treatment that Bill Clinton delivered Jesse Jackson in the 90s. And Jesse Jackson certainly has his own highly complicated and problematic, probably more populist than left politics. If you listen to, some of Bill Fletcher's analysis, and Bill Fletcher's also worked on that campaign, as I keep saying, one of the most astute people in American politics by far, Bill Fletcher Jr. But yeah, what a monster. There's Bernie again, beating the drum for white nationalism. I mean, it's just gotten so demented, especially as somebody, and I will always say this, who was a strong Bernie supporter. As soon as he announced, I knew, of course, I would support him because I'm progressive. But, I thought the first several protests he faced, the first couple protests from Black Lives Matter were excellent. They were correct to protest him and other candidates in and of itself, period. And in fact, in his case, they made him a much better candidate. But, now some of the stuff I just see about him is just, it's just so cynical and breathtakingly disingenuous and absurd. And the kind of vendetta against him, look, it will never stop being just utterly bizarre. And again, I'll throw one more in the mix. I say this as somebody who, I told people, and we reflected, I believe, 91% of Bernie primary voters, because only 90 didn't vote for Hillary Clinton in the general election. who said, of course, if you're in a swing state, vote for Hillary Clinton. And in fact, I ended up voting for Hillary Clinton in New York because I was so, the whole Jill Stein thing is another thing, but the Green Party's argument about change was so moralistic and non-strategic that it wasn't even a satisfying protest vote. So I thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to vote for the first woman president. That's something cool in and of itself. But I'm sitting here and I'm tabling support for the coup in Honduras, support for the bankruptcy bill, support for crime legislation, you can just go on and on and on and on, all on a policy level. Haiti. And yet, some people on the other side of that equation maintain a just bizarre, cultish, fanatical hatred of the guy, which is just breathtaking. And again, I say this as somebody who's like, I'll disagree with you if you don't support him in 2020. I'll strongly disagree, but cool, whatever. Vote for who you need to vote for. You have a criticism of him that's legitimate, like a Bill Fletcher Jr.'s, excellent. I want to hear it. But so much of what's marshaled against him is just a response to a fiction that people have created in their heads about him, or maybe bad response to people that support him on social media, but not him. And, I think clips like that are a good reminder. So thank you, weird Never Birdie Twitter account.
I personally have a long history of getting upset at politicians not observing a long enough lag time between speeches before they give their own speeches. Yeah. So it wasn't the first time for me getting upset about that specific thing.
Right. Oh my God. Also just, man, Twitter is terrible. Actually, do we have this one? I want to do Nomiki real quick. There was a debate last night in New York City. This public advocate race is first and foremost important for New York City, obviously, but this is New York City legitimately has national, in fact, global implications. Nomiki Konst, we know her. She's a great candidate. She's a for real progressive. She's got some incredibly creative ideas about how to use this really unique office as sort of public accountability, but also almost like a sort of massive investigative journalism fund. And she's talking really smart, really shrewd democratic socialist ideas and refusing money from the real estate industry, which is, of course, enormously dangerous and harmful in New York as it is everywhere else. And here she is talking about what's happening with the MTA. Blame privatization, blame austerity, blame lack of investment, blame lack of redistribution, and thank the workers and labor unions who are still keeping the thing running while Andrew Cuomo and others have undermined it. Here she is talking about what should be done for the MTA.
I believe in the municipalization of the MTA. I do think that the city should have more control, but it shouldn't all land in the mayor's hands. That's the problem with this city. When you look at the MTA board, they're all political appointees. You have a real estate developer on the board of the MTA who is best friends with the governor, someone who doesn't live in the city, who admitted to not taking buses ever. That's the person who's deciding our livelihood. The lifeblood of this city is being starved. Let me say that again. The MTA is being starved of resources. They're intentionally not putting money into the MTA, what I believe is for the reason of privatizing it. It's an old scheme. Starve the city of its infrastructure. Don't tax the wealthy to fund that infrastructure, and then put the costs on working people who are not only being driven out of their homes because they're being rezoned by these developers, but now it's harder for them to commute to work, which could cost them pay, or worse, their jobs. So we need to audit the MTA, and we need to municipalize it so the whole city has power over its lifeblood.
Ms. Konst, for right now, though, given the governance structure, should the city be giving more money to the transit system?
Yes, but I think that they should be taxing these developers, Amazon, and the oligarchs who are buying up real estate left and right and using our buildings as the Cayman Islands for their bank accounts.
Boom. Contribute to and vote for Nomiki Konst. Do you mind looking up? That's in a couple of weeks, voting day. That's a big race. And I want Nomiki out there front and center talking about the oligarchs using New York City real estate like the Cayman Islands. And yes, there's not a single problem that can't be solved by taking back money from Amazon and other oligarchs. The MTA is just one of many.
Tuesday, February 26th.
Get out there. Let's make it happen. Nomiki Konst, New York City public advocate. All right. Be silly. NPR's insightful question in AOC. The Republicans said they were implementing a policy that was beneficial to the country. It wasn't. And now you're saying exactly the same thing. Yes. I mean, that was, again, I'll give you the how are you going to pay for it question. Fine. Whatever. It's boring. It's kind of hacky. But sure. But the Republicans who just lie as a matter of essentially, I mean, maybe not in the NPR world, but I mean, in pretty broad public record, that we have endless, I mean, we've already seen them lie about various wealth redistribution to the rich tax packages and how they've worked out. The closest analog we have to what she's talking about in a microscopic form would be the 2009 stimulus. And then, of course, historically, the New Deal, which still today takes people out of poverty. So, I mean, just the idea that you're drawing that analogy is just beyond ludicrous.
Tax cuts versus infrastructure spending.
I mean, it's just, yeah, it's embarrassing.
These major media companies are pathological with this stuff. Like, these people cannot learn the lessons that they need to, which is why, I mean, historically speaking, we've probably talked about this before, but 19th century, it was all partisan and, ideological news, basically. Right. And I think we need more of that because of how much these sort of mid-century news companies, like the mass culture, like the major networks and those things, they were for a different time, and the harmful effects. I mean, this is what Chomsky made his bones on, but good riddance to him, I guess is what.
I agree. I mean, and the function of aggressive, objective reporting, which is also, by the way, profoundly underfunded by these same incumbent corporations, is a separate function. But yeah, the whole editorial line and bloat, get rid of it. Support people like us, honestly. It's better, period. Habermas Malo. Michael, I'm curious what you think of Lee Phillips' book, Austerity Ecology. Now he says that Greenpeace is just as guilty of crimes against humanity as fossil fuel companies. I work in WPA building, and every school I went to was built during the WPA. I'm not a pig farm in the Ozarks because of massive military spending during the New Deal era. My grandfather got free housing, education, and job. But listen, Ocasio understands we have individual agency. MLK was talking about the transvaluation of values during Great Society in Keynesian era because he understood that the quote-unquote public sector was not necessarily democratic. We need to stop depending on the capitalists and their states and courts to save us. All right, I don't exactly understand the last thread there. And again, my critique of neoliberal lifestyle politics is not a suggestion that one shouldn't, take individual actions. But again, across the board, including on conversations that occur in other arenas, the emphasis on personal, the conversation on personal behavior is way over-focused on. And actually, to the extent that it should be talked about, it should be much more in realms of psychology and community building, and which are all a part and interact with politics. But if you really want to get to these macro questions, you got to be in politics and economics.
And for the purposes of a left-wing podcast, it's what we choose to spend our time on is not that stuff. It'd be literally a waste of time. You can get that elsewhere.
Yeah, precisely. Okay, the second point, yes, WPA was really big deal. I haven't read Lee Phillips' books. I've read excerpts of it, and I like a lot of it. My concern be as you present that, that's that sounds very hyperbolic to me, right? So I don't I want to, but I want to read it before I comment on it. Fairness Fairy. All right. I'm going to read this, and then if there's an IM that responds to it, I'll read that, but I'm not going to take calls on this. I'll just say up front. Hopefully there'll be an IM that responds to this, and then that's it. The idea that veganism is necessary to address climate change is overly simplistic. Many vegan substitutes for butter, for instance, are tropical oils like palm or coconut. While they may or may not be produced sustainably, they also may not. Deforestation, fuel for transportation can all contribute to climate change as well. We should all eat less meat and dairy and work to reduce industrial farming. Many people also cannot tolerate a 100% vegan diet. I have to be honest, and I really don't want to get into this debate, but I tell me the lie in that take. that take is all objectively true, and I'm not opposed. If you want to go for veganism, that's great, but that's a very smart, very sensible take. And if there's another take, I'll read it, but no calls. All right, first call of the day. You're calling from a 210 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
And also just a large diet.
Sorry, yeah, dude, you missed your opportunity. All right, you're calling
it's
from
like a holdup.
You're calling from a 330 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hello?
330. Are you there?
Yeah. This is Nicholas from Canton, Ohio.
Hey, Nicholas, what's going on? What's on your mind?
Well, so recently I've been doing a lot of searching of the literature on the issue of healthcare and what's the most optimal approach towards universal healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
And I found a meta-analysis, or rather systematic review, that I think that a lot of your audience would be interested in, where it's titled Single Payer or Multi-Payer, a Systematic Review.
Okay.
And essentially what it does is that it goes through a lot of the literature, where it goes through 15 qualitative and a whole bunch of quantitative comparisons, where they find that basically when compared against each other, single-payer systems are the most cost-effective healthcare systems in the world, and it goes along with refuting this fallacy that essentially the free market is the most optimal approach to everything. Because when you look at a lot of the healthcare economics literature on the issue, Kenneth Arrow wrote in the 1970s that actually health insurance is not meant to be treated as a commodity, because there's a difference in information between the buyers and the sellers of
Mm-hmm.
health insurance, as one of the many examples that he writes in his paper. And so this idea that we can just continue to take an incrementalist approach in perpetuating the Affordable Care Act as opposed to creating a Medicare for all system is just a very large fallacy. And what I often find is that a lot of people that make these arguments aren't really looking at it based off of the literature. That actually we have facts on our side to this issue.
Okay, Nick, real quick, tell everybody the name of the piece again.
What'd you say?
Tell everybody the name of the piece again.
It's called Single Payer or Multi-Payer, a Systematic Review. I believe it's in the Journal of Public Health.
Thanks a million, Nick. That's a good call. Thank you. All right, folks. I gotta address this. I haven't talked about Lula da Silva on this show for a little while, but I will continue to cover it on this show, and of course, we cover it a lot on TMBS. But let me just reset a little bit why this matters so much. And obviously, some of it's personal to me. I think that this is an incredibly admirable and important leader in the 21st century, and the treatment of him is abysmal and terrifying and a moral scar on the world. But broadening out from that, let's look at a couple of variables in play, because it goes to several dynamics that we need to understand, and I'll give you the new news in a second. One is the ongoing interference of the United States in Latin America, which we're seeing come to a head in this intervention and pressure in Venezuela. Going back, of course, we all know the history. We know going back to Eisenhower backing coups in Guatemala. We know that Nixon backed the coup that got rid of Allende in Chile. We've known that at least 48, if not more, coups have been backed by the United States in Latin America, as well as supporting, in the Condor years in the 70s and 80s, coordinated death squads across the region backed by the United States, and the CIA involvement in the juntas and mass murders in Central America under Reagan in the 80s, through Panama with Bush, and then in the 90s into the aughts, which is what the pink wave came out of, was a paradox where certainly under Clinton and Bush II, well, there was definitely attempted coups with Bush II, and there certainly was a massive strong-arming of Latin American and Caribbean economies. The Clinton administration's policies on cotton, as an example, did enormous damage to Haiti. And you also had a sort of a slight stasis where at least center-left governments could come into power, and if they played by what was then consensus on market rules, they could use some of the excess of a commodities boom to invest in their people. And then there was another contingent, as exemplified by Chavez, who took a more aggressive posture, and then people like Rafael Correa in Ecuador, who were in the middle. But they all backed each other. And they all had a shared commitment to autonomy and independence for Latin America, and one that was not adversarial to the United States or Europe. It wasn't adversarial to anybody. President Lula was equally at home and praised by George W. Bush, Tony Blair, and Barack Obama, as he was by leaders in the Middle East and Africa, as well as being widely admired across Latin America. So, and this leads to the second two parts here. One, again, this presidency is unparalleled in terms of the 21st century. The historian Perry Anderson said he probably is the most successful president of this century. That's important. It's important on a progressive show, and if you want to be in a progressive movement, when any leader lifts between 30 and 40 million people out of abject poverty, when anybody eliminates hunger in a country. The UN had said there was a serious hunger problem in Brazil. After Lula is president, because of serious investment, there's no longer hunger in Brazil. And then you look at, even as an example, his attempts to forge a deal with Iran on their nuclear weapons, or excuse me, not their weapons, their nuclear program was a forerunner to what ended up being negotiated. So this is an incredibly successful president. This is also a guy who grew up homeless and was a labor union leader who helped liberate Brazil from a military dictatorship in the 1980s. So he also, just by his very identity, in fact, represented a rebuke of Brazil's elite and ended up leaving office with a mid-80s approval rating. And this is where the backlash and the component of U.S. foreign policy comes in, which is starting with the Clinton State Department, the Obama administration, okaying a coup against Manuel Zelaya in Honduras in 2009. Manuel Zelaya was on the Lula end of the pink tide, a moderate center-left leader in Honduras who started working with the social movements and started understanding the need for social investment. In fact, when he was run out by the military, Lula hosted him, they provided him refuge in the Brazilian embassy at the time. And while the dynamic with Venezuela was different, and there was a hugely aggressive approach towards Venezuela from Bush and Obama, and the Venezuelan government achieved many great things under Chavez, but they also had problems, as well as any government does. Lula played by these rules and managed to create autonomy and lift people out of poverty, but ultimately it came to a head with an unwillingness to privatize key strategic Brazilian industries, like their oil reserves, which plays a huge role in the shifting U.S. posture towards him and the Workers' Party and the Dilma administration that came after him, and then the backlash from the Brazilian elites. And so by this time, starting in, say, 2012 and so, you have, along with these broad, sprawling corruption investigations that only focus on center-left to left leaders backed by the United States, which what they call lawfare in Brazil, the process that targeted Lula. You also have the new version of old CIA propaganda, which is things like the Atlas Network, which is funded by the Koch brothers, operating in Brazil and in Venezuela and elsewhere to disseminate libertarian propaganda. and support far-right reactionary forces in Latin America. In 2016, there was a judicial process that removed Dilma Rousseff from power. It was a coup, and it's broadly acknowledged as such now. And then, of course, last summer, we saw Lula, in spite of all of this, leading by double digits in the polls. He was put in prison literally for indeterminate acts. That was the phrase they used. Sergio Moro, the special prosecutor who was backed by the Justice Department here, essentially acknowledged that he had no material evidence to jail Lula, but just knew, he felt it in his gut that something was wrong. So out of this multi-billion-dollar corruption investigation that implicated all major parties in Brazil, because there's structural corruption in Brazil, which we can get to some other time, which implicates the whole political system, certainly not just the Workers' Party. One seaside condo, which Lula didn't even own, and they couldn't even prove that he literally even physically spent time in, he was put in jail for 12 years, barred for running for president in contradiction of all international law, and not allowed to do public interviews, totally silenced. Bolsonaro's been in power now for a couple of months. He was backed by Wall Street, backed by Trump, backed by Trudeau, and so on. And there are now actual corruption investigations emerging around Bolsonaro, like connections between his family and a paramilitary gang that assassinated Marielle Franco. Besides all of the overt corruption taking place, like the destruction of the Amazon. And they have just taken this opportunity to slap Lula with another 12-year sentence for, I kid you not, kitchen renovations on a friend's house. Again, no proof that he even owned the thing, and also all of this took place post-presidency. So, again, you want to take a global phenomenon? Maybe Barack Obama shouldn't go on vacation with Richard Branson after he's president. But he's not going to go to jail for it, and nor should he. This is shocking. This is also, by the way, a couple weeks ago, they did an exorcism around Lula's office. These are crazy, demented, dangerous people who've criminalized the most important president in Brazil and by extension Latin America's history, and now we're attempting to erase him from the public record in entirety. Judge Sergio Moro, the judge that hounded and persecuted Lula, is now, of course, justice minister in this fascistic, corrupt Brazilian government. And I will just say, as an example, in this new ludicrous ruling, I'll quote briefly now from Brian Muir in Brazil Wire. Basically, again, there was no evidence that Lula owned the home. The judge who sentenced him was not even in the jurisdiction where the supposed crime took place. As in the case, this is quoting now briefly, as in the case of the Guaraúja beachfront apartment used to arrest Lula at the outset of the 2018 election season when he was leading the polls, investigators were unable to prove that Lula owns the property in question. In this case, the property is legally registered to the name Fernando Bittar. Bittar is a businessman and son of one of Lula's oldest friends, Jacobin, who's a former union leader and ex-mayor of Campinas, which is a population of 1 million and is the 11th richest city in Brazil. Goes on to explain that, again, this was in a different judicial system. And the other thing that's just kind of funny in this case is that the judge in their ruling, she made a lot of technical mistakes, including listing employees and co-defendants in the case as two different people when they actually referred to one different entity. Like literally a company name was listed as two different people in the case. So look, we can get it, dig into more of the details if you want to. I would suggest reading everything in Brazil Wire, but that is the big picture context we're in. And in an even bigger picture, all of these fascist governments, whether it's drain the swamp, whether it's bar the most popular politician and important politician in the country running for president so you can facilitate fascism, whether it's the mafia investigations that lead to Berlusconi in Italy, it's all a shallow demagogic anti-corruption politics that leads to the far right. So people are going to need to get much smarter about how we talk about corruption, what that actually means and specifically what we're actually targeting. Because right now, generic anti-corruption discourse is the handmaiden of global fascism. And I will continue to say, I mean, they're trying to make it so this man, he cannot even go see his family. He's in solitary confinement. They want him to die in prison. And there are many other examples, which I don't have time to get into, but ways in which they're even just ignoring Brazilian legal precedent to do this. It's inhumane. It's disgusting. And all of us, certainly with any platform or any access to anything, need to speak on it. And more people. Bernie spoke about it in the spring, and Barbara Lee and Ro Khanna and Keith Ellison and other good Congress people signed a letter. But there needs to be a hell of a lot more done on this. And please do not ever send me some trash New York Times article telling me that, there was another corruption investigation. If you believe these cases, you're essentially believing, if Whitaker and Jeff Sessions had unlimited power to prosecute Barack Obama, and he was in jail while Trump was president, but also he could run for a third term, but was barred for running. That's essentially what you're doing. Okay. Let's take another call. You're calling from a 647 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Sebastian. I'm calling from Canada.
Hey, Sebastian. What's going on?
First of all, I want to shout out the live chat for calling me Sebastian Gorka every time I call in.
Nice. Sounds like some solid material there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In a certain sense.
Next, I want to say shout out to Matt for the State of the Union drops.
Oh, that was amazing.
I think that might have been the single greatest one game performance by a live stream producer in the history of YouTube.
That was my 81-point game.
Yeah, that was definitely an 81-point game. It was also the only thing keeping the rest of us from slitting our wrists.
But anyway, I want to talk about how you guys you've done a really good job at pointing out this white male conservative aggrievement that the most oppressed class. I think actually, Jesse Lee Peterson said that the most oppressed political class in the United States is the white Christian conservative man of power.
Okay.
and I think the whole border non-crisis, the way that Trump talks about it, is a perfect example of that. I mean, for example, we in this country, 70% of our murder victims are killed with guns smuggled in from the U.S. And, of course, that's only a fraction of the price that Mexico has had to pay. The drug war in Mexico has its roots in the 1980s, but you can trace the escalation of violence into all-out war in that country from basically the repeal of the sunset of the assault weapons ban in the U.S. In Spanish, they call the AK-47 the cop killer because when you've outgunned the police, it's hopeless. They have to call them the army. And so the idea that that the U.S. is somehow, I don't know, the effects are detrimental is just crazy.
Yeah.
But
yep.
It just, I think it's the next, in a line of this, and you guys pointed out all the time, the aggrievement of privilege, basically.
Yeah, I mean, that's a major, that certainly explains the Republican dynamic of it, and that's who drives it. That's, probably about 30% or so of the country. And then there might be some other people who are just delusionally and incorrectly totally misdiagnosing their actual problems, and then getting hoodwinked and deluded into blaming it on a problem that doesn't exist. But yeah, that's it. And by the way, if Canada, or actually Mexico for that matter, because our guns fuel, as you were saying, Mexico, a lot of the violence in Mexico, the artillery is coming in a fair amount of cases from the United States. If the United States or Canada, if Canada or Mexico had the same policy set as the United States did with regards to how we've used drones in Pakistan and Yemen as an example, they would be flying drones over gun shops in Arizona, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Thanks for the call, man. All right, let's actually do this for a second. Mike Pompeo is a extraordinarily dangerous person, and always has been. He was the Koch brothers' congressman. He was head of the CIA. He's a extreme far-right corporatist, but I think he also has some quite Pencean, extreme apocalyptic religious views. And he has been obviously very aggressive, and we have to look too. I mean, the announcement of keeping troops in Iraq to keep an eye on Iran should be setting off every type of alarm bell imaginable. Trump has been making noises and threats about a coup in Venezuela from the beginning. Let's just reiterate this again. You can have critiques of Maduro. You can have critiques of Chavez. I happen to think Chavez is a very defensible figure, but a far from perfect one. And you can also recognize the fact that, look, the actual problems in Venezuela, including corruption, cartels, and all the rest of it, none of this is going to be solved or changed by a far-right government backed by the United States and Brazil and Colombia. I think that should go without saying, with a point person whose history is death squads in the 80s and Elliot Abrams. So that's why we oppose this coup effort in Venezuela, full stop. Full stop. And we can have the conversations about Venezuela and the debates and so on. That's great. U.S. intervention there, we oppose, full stop. Also, the remnants of the accomplishments, which have been greatly depreciated in the last several years as a result of both sanctions and economic warfare and the failures of Maduro, would be almost certainly eliminated in a U.S.-backed government. There still are some achievements that live on there in terms of some cooperatives on a local scale. But you can tell that the administration's pulling out the heavy guns here, because this myth, this idea going back for quite some time in an attempt to Sicario 2 freak out Americans, Mike Pompeo is on it on Fox News.
Do you have concerns that Venezuela runs the risk of turning into a no man's land where you have these bad actors, including some with links to Hezbollah, that could be more of a threat because they're in our hemisphere?
Yeah, Trish, I'm glad you brought that up. People don't recognize that Hezbollah has active cells. The Iranians are impacting the people of Venezuela and throughout South America. We have an obligation to take down that risk for America.
Okay, so first of all, it's unfashionable to say, but Hezbollah has zero operational interest in the United States. None. Yes, in the 1980s, Hezbollah was definitely responsible for killing Marines in Lebanon. Now, that's terrible that happened. That's a bad thing. I don't want anybody to get harmed like that. But if you can't see the difference between the complicated geopolitics and guerrilla operations in a local zone versus what he's implying there, which is more like Al-Qaeda or ISIS types attacks in the United States, you're being dishonest. There is zero evidence that Hezbollah has a desire to mount some type of 9/11 style or any style attack like that in the United States. And in fact, part of this is reflecting its own shifting politics in the Middle East because of what's happening in Syria. But if I recall, Hezbollah sort of somewhat mildly criticized the attacks on Charlie Hebdo, if I recall correctly. And in a Syrian context, Hezbollah is actually, with the Iranians, protecting minority communities in certain areas from ISIS. And then the second thing is, when you say cells, you're evoking an image of like training camps. It's ridiculous. To the extent that what he's saying is remotely true, and this needs to be aggressively fact-checked, might mean that there's connections between drug trafficking routes in Venezuela and people who do finances for Hezbollah. And if that is true, then that basically could be in a statement that you probably could expand to there are relationships between drug cartel networks everywhere to everywhere. It's you. By the time you specify it, it means nothing. But he's doing his best to fearmonger.
They're in our hemisphere, though.
Right, they're in our hemisphere.
You know, Vladimir Putin's in our hemisphere. In
a big
the
way.
northern hemisphere I'm talking about. Gotta worry about that too.
Gotta worry about a lot of hemispheres.
A lot of hemispheric risks.
Hemispheric activity. I mean, look, if you have fact check on, I have never heard, I saw one far right person from Foundation for the Defense of Democracy said something about Hezbollah in Venezuela to Vice. That was what we could find. And then there is Treasury Department, which talks about cartel activities. And again, cartel activities is a highly expansive term. And there's no doubt, I think it's quite well.
About it.
There's precisely. We talk about connection, possible direct or indirect connections to cartels. I'm not sure is something that this administration wants to go in. But yeah, you're calling from a 443 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
This is Aaron from Baltimore.
Hey, Aaron, what's going on? What's on your mind?
Not too much. I just want to say love your show.
Thanks, man.
Also love Jamie's show, Antifada. And
Cool.
sorry, Matt, haven't listened to the Literary Hangover.
Yeah, whatever.
But I did buy, The House of Seven Gables. I'm going to read that.
Wow. Okay.
So I'm
Wait. Hold up. Why don't you start with the show?
Doing work for Hawthorne.
Versus getting that sounds a little ambitious, dude. Why don't you start by subscribing to Literary Hangover?
I got too many shows. I need a book,
All right.
Get my iPod.
All right.
Can't listen to all your shows,
I don't know about that. I'm
But
sure
anyway,
there's other shows that you could lose in the rotation. Okay, but anyways, go ahead. Yes, sir. What's on your mind?
So I got two things. One real quick. Just wanted to give a shout out to my friend Amy, who helped start the Sunrise Movement in Baltimore. So we're pushing for the Green New Deal, and we have. So if anyone in the Baltimore area, check us out on Facebook. We're going to be pushing our Congress members next week to sign on to the Green New Deal. So
awesome.
It's pretty cool.
Yep. What's the other one?
And I just wanted to, the other thing, so I've watched the Empire Files, which someone recommended on the chat one time last week, I think.
That's
Abby
Abby Martin's show?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And so, it looks to me like, the creation of the Constituent Assembly there was an attempt at compromise and all these things, and obviously there's an economic war from the business and the global section.
You got to be specific. Where?
Oh, yeah. So, sorry, from the United States.
I don't know what you're saying.
In Venezuela. I'm sorry.
What constituent?
Venezuela.
Okay, what constituent assembly?
The Constituent Assembly that was created in 2017, I think.
Okay. Yep.
Which was viewed as from the right wing as Lula, as Maduro trying to take over.
Not the same dude. Okay. So and there's been economic warfare.
I know. Sorry.
No problem. There's been economic warfare, but what's the what's the go ahead.
Really, my point is, and I've heard you've had some. You say there's some legitimate criticisms of Maduro. And I've been watching, the shows, and I haven't really heard you go into that, really. So,
I would honestly go into past archives. I mean, look, I've been
trying to find it.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Well, last year I did an interview with Ava Gollinger on this show that was much more kind of fully fleshed out on Venezuela and included some very robust. I mean, look, the bottom line is under Chavez, you have a complex. Historic figure, and what he did that was great was he took oil that already was public oil, by the way. Venezuela had made its oil public sector well before Chavez, and he just came in and he did what you need to do, which is you know what, this money's coming in and it's gonna, instead of going to the wealthy and the cronies, it's going to the poor, and we're gonna all the things you need to do, just redistribute wealth, give people healthcare, education. They did incredible work on literacy. And he also had these experiments in direct democracy and workers' cooperatives. Now, my understanding of those is there wasn't any quality control. So those things really depended, in certain areas, those things were enormous successes and showed a path forward for what democracy really should be, and a huge testament to the success of the Bolivarian Revolution. And in other areas, it just created different types of patronage and corruption networks. Then there's the bigger picture, which is there's actually features of the Venezuelan state, and it could be any state, in this case it's Venezuelan, that, favored incumbent political parties, that had patronage networks, military connections to cartels and things like that, that weren't structurally changed by Chavez. So frankly, in the same way that, certainly I know more about Brazil, it would be impossible essentially to do this, but Lula and Dilma did amazing things for people in the context of accepting some of the innate corruption and disparities of Brazilian oligarchy, which of course ended up striking back and creating this counter coup against them. But they chose to make the calculation of working inside the context as best they could of Brazilian oligarchy and Western capital to achieve things for people. I think Chavez, in a very different way, actually made some of the same calculations. And then by the time you get to Maduro, and then Chavez, I think Chavez, there's, if you read Ava Gollinger, there's personnel problems, picking bad people, staffing things, and like all sorts of stuff that get into the nuances of government. And then by the time you get to Maduro taking over, the intensity of the warfare from the United States is at such a high degree. Oil prices have plummeted, and these programs haven't been, there hasn't been a kind of broader economic diversification to keep money and investment flowing in for these things. Plus, again, you can never not emphasize U.S. economic warfare and coup mongering. And so you have a guy, Maduro, who it would take a genius of unparalleled political talent, maybe a Chavez, to pull off that balancing act, and he hasn't been able to. And part of not being able to has been some monetary schemes that totally don't work and are ridiculous. Part of that has definitely been increasing state repression, which was always, I would say, was there to some extent during Chavez, but was lied about and exaggerated in the United States. And in the last couple of years under Maduro, it's become a lot more real. So, yeah. I mean, and look, the bottom line is, you're not, coups and threats are not going to support somebody in governing better. But so that's kind of like the top line. But I think right now in a coup context, it is not the time to emphasize the failings of that government. But they're there. We don't have to lie about them or shy from them. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm on board with that. I was just trying to get a, better frame.
Sure.
But yeah, thanks for taking my call.
Oh, thank you, man.
Also, Lula Libre.
Lula Libre. There you go. Ending on a very strong note. All right, let's play these two other clips. These are also from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's conversation on NPR this morning. This is why she explains the concept of, and again, this is another one of like, really? Is NPR not under? Okay. Externalities should be in the general discourse, but it hasn't been because we've lived in neoliberal nonsense land, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez explains to NPR what externalities are and what economics does not measure.
As you know, Congresswoman, one reason that people who are politically conservative are skeptical of efforts to combat climate change is that it sounds to them like it requires massive government intervention, which they just don't like. Are you prepared to put on the table that, yes, actually, they're right. What this requires is massive government intervention?
It does. Yeah, I have no problem saying that. Why? Because we have tried their approach for 40 years. For 40 years, we tried to let the private sector take care of it. They said, we got this. We can do this. The forces of the market are going to force us to innovate, except for the fact that there's a little thing in economics called externalities. And what that means is that a corporation can dump pollution in the river and they don't have to pay for it, and taxpayers have to pay for cleaning up our air, cleaning up our water, and saving the planet. And so we've already been paying the costs, except we have not been getting any of the benefit. And so what we're here to say is that government is not just for cleaning up other people's mess, but it's also for building solutions in places where the private sector will not.
There it is. So, and it's also what's funny about the pretext of that question is it belies such a fundamental lack of faith in democracy. I mean, you can substitute words you could use for sort of government in that sense is the ability of a polity to solve big problems and not be at the whim of extractive private entities that have an incredibly narrow and highly short-term sense of interest, which is quite literally making the planet uninhabitable. But there's also definitely a visionary and moral dimension to this, and she really weaves these quite well. Here she is contrasting the Green New Deal with the white nationalism of Donald Trump.
Do you feel that you know how to take the great fame that you have won over the last several months and turn that fame into power?
No. I think that part of where I am right now is that I'm learning. I think that really what I hope we're able to do as a party and as a nation is rediscover the power of public imagination. I think that this is a very special moment. And frankly, that is something that I think the president did do, in that he was able to take his profile and say, here's this hugely impossible thing that seems ridiculous, but I'm going to seriously push for it. And for him, that's his wall. And obviously I'm diametrically opposed to it. But I think that the reason he's so attached to this thing, despite the fact that it's not what voters want, despite the fact that it's not what the American people want, is that it's the only vision he has. He has no other picture of America except an America with a huge wall on the southern border. And I think that what we have a responsibility to do is show what another America looks like. Okay, let's take all of that political energy, all of that resource that would go into building a massive second medieval wall on our southern border. And what if we actually took all that concrete and poured it into roads? What if we took all of that engineering and dedicated it to new energy? What if we took all of that, but actually invested in something that will have payback and a return on our investment for the American people?
Exactly. And also, and it's great too that she doesn't, people have gotten so burned out on hopey changey rhetoric because it's been attached to insufficient and sometimes even just really bad policies. It's great that she's still keeping that kind of visionary dimension with the actual substance of a real transformative democratic New Deal, Green New Deal. And yeah, I mean, what a catastrophic, racist, and stupid vision Trump's vision is. I'm confident who will win out.
She should work up a FDR impression and just be like, should. I don't know how we're gonna. I can't. Yeah. It sounds like MLK.
What a soon. I don't know, Steve, but it's a dumb motherfucking question. Hey, Steve, how about you get the fuck out of my office and then record 10 minutes about how long the trip is to the congressional cafeteria? We were listening to this full interview in prep this morning, and it was like the classic, like, dumb middlebrow NPR filler before they started asking her questions about, like, spending or whatever. Like, how are you going to pay for it? It was all like, the window opened, revealing a slight ray of sunlight in the dynamic freshman congressman. You're just like, shut the fuck up and do your interview.
Walking is a big part of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's routine as she sits in the furthest... I can't even get through this.
Yeah, I know.
It's because the CIA is like, keep as much of this about things besides politics as we can.
Right.
NPR.
Yeah. And you're just sitting there just like, oh my, the wind up is so ridiculous that you're like sitting there like, oh my God, can you fucking get to your dumb deficit question already? Because then at least we'll get like
talk about the deficit.
Just do something.
Yeah, because with AOC, it's
don't you want to ask how she's going to afford it?
It is interesting because like previously those questions, like don't ask the Democratic politician that because they're gonna have to like repeat some pablum that is gonna irritate us. But now it's like, yes, get to that question so that the Democratic politician can actually answer why it's a dumb question.
Right. She'll explain why it's a dumb question if you just get to it quickly. Jay Cool, hey Michael, do you know much about El Salvador's new president Niab Buckle or have thoughts on political direction there? Thanks for the great work you guys do. I know nothing except for I think that they have opposed coup in Venezuela. So that's an enormously brave move. I could look into it more.
The Howard Schultz platform speech at Purdue University is ongoing right now, and a quote from Dave Weigel: "Healthcare costs are the biggest driver of unaffordable care." It's good stuff.
Don't piss down my back and tell me it's raining.
I mean, he is the, you know, we were playing the drops earlier and he said something like, "I'm not in bed with any special interest," and it's like, dude, you literally are the special interest.
I guess he doesn't sleep in bed then.
Yeah, I guess so.
Like,
He
the
doesn't
point of
sleep
all
with
this is to
himself.
keep you motherfuckers away from government.
Right. That is the whole point of everything, is to get, I mean, my God, all of you, not only out of government, but I would also like to say off of TV. You know what? The internet is more democratized. Howard Schultz wants to have a YouTube channel where he puts out highly produced, dumb nonsense videos where he whines about his taxes being increased and he overpays a bunch of yes people to do dumb deficit videos and they get 300 views. Great. No, the idea that he is getting a CNN town hall should evoke questions of the crudest pay-for-play ideas possible. I don't know. I don't know. But it is, look, if he's getting one, I was going to say, look, all right, if Kamala Harris is getting one, I want to see Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders get one because those are other frontline Democratic candidates. If Howard Schultz is getting one, I want Tulsi Gabbard. I want Julian Castro.
I want CNN subpoenaed.
I want CNN subpoenaed. I want to see all of their records. I want the rent is too damn high guy if he mounts a candidacy. I'm much more interested in what he has to say than what Howard Schultz has to say. It is fucking ridiculous. If they're giving him a platform, he has no public support, no public interest. The only people that have any direct benefit from him are the consultants that are going to hose him. And if the Democrats nominate an actual progressive candidate and Wall Street and the oligarchs have a meltdown, he will sink an enormous amount of money into handing re-election as best he can to George W. Bush. Donald Trump. And make no mistake, that's what the play is. Because I refuse to believe. I think Howard Schultz is an incredibly delusional, divorced from reality person, but I'll give him some credit here. I do not think he is dumb enough to think he is going to win the presidency. I don't. I really don't. So this whole fucking charade is a threat from the oligarch class of this country and its conduits on all the corporate media outlets that, you know what, Democratic Party, you better not nominate a Bernie Sanders or an Elizabeth Warren who's serious about these issues. If you do, this asshole's going to go around the country. We're going to fund money to him. He's got his own bank account. He's going to get endless media coverage, even though he'll never poll above single digits, I confidently predict. And he might, though, this is when it starts to get this micro stuff with the Electoral College. Maybe he does steal some suburban votes in Pennsylvania. You know, maybe he does that. And make no mistake, it is to ensure Donald Trump is reelected because they will prefer fascism over the left because they only care about their money at the end of the day. But because Trump is so disgusting and so despicable, they want plausible deniability even inside themselves that they're not actually doing this. Mm-hmm. But nobody thinks, including Howard Schultz, that he is ever going to sit at the fucking desk in the Oval Office. It's disgusting, the game these people are playing.
Take their shit, guys.
It's lazy too, because I'm reading Weigel right now, and he's saying, I mean, we'll definitely have some more Howard Schultz content for everyone tomorrow, but apparently a big pillar of his platform is going to be speaking out and regulating gerrymandering, which he can't do as president.
So is this like already like are we already in like accidental Mussolini territory here? Like, wait, are you saying that you're going to personally engineer state courts? Fucking.
If you want to help that, give Ari Berman like $1 billion.
Yeah, if you're concerned about democracy.
Ari Berman.
No, Ari Berman. No, not Ari Melber.
Yeah, no, almost made that mistake.
Ari Berman is the nice Jewish boy for voting.
Yes, right.
Trying to think of a rap line that Ari Melber could spin for gerrymandering.
No, don't. That's what Howard Schultz could do.
Don't reward that behavior.
Gotta split up blue and red, all weird, like Crips and Bloods.
Ari Melber anti-gerrymander rap tour. That's probably the type of bold, innovative thinking
that Howard Schultz would bankroll.
Yeah,
the
Howard
type of
Schultz,
imagination he wants to risk.
He should risk that, Howard. You're calling from a 248 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Oh, is this me? Oh,
yes,
sorry.
it's you. No
I know you guys hate when people ask that.
No, it's fine. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Massachusetts, originally from Detroit, Michigan.
Cool. What's your name?
And I've been Austin.
Austin. What's on your mind, man?
I started watching you guys like a couple weeks ago, and the first video I saw from you guys was actually you dunking on Dave Rubin, and it was like
nice.
Something about Ben Shapiro not wanting to bake a cake for him.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
And it just cracked me up because
you don't want to
for a while I was kind of
sorry.
Go ahead. What?
No, sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead. For a while, you were kind of what?
For a while, I was kind of sucked into that kind of IDW kind of bullshit web for a little while.
Right.
And so, like, I don't know. I kind of considered myself a centrist for a little while, but I think what I really was just a leftist. But I was kind of too afraid to admit that because it's kind of tough to put yourself in a position where if you truly believe in your convictions, you have to stop being friends with certain kind of people, or can't hang out with certain kind of people. So I was kind of
or maybe if you do, like, because I'm not a big, I joke about it, but whatever, like, be friends with whoever you're friends with. But even just like I notice in certain groups it does eliminate a lot of social niceties. Like when somebody repeats a piety or a cliche, like, oh, well, both sides, or some bullshit like that. And you are the one to be like, well, actually, no. Like, what do you mean? Like, you think when Howard Schultz says that Democrats calling for Medicare for all is an equivalent to putting children in cages, that's an example of both sides being irrational? Like, are you actually saying something that, immoral and catastrophically stupid? It makes conversation a little bit more difficult when you don't just sort of nod your head along with the bullshit. But welcome aboard.
Oh, yeah.
Welcome aboard, Austin.
Yeah, thank you. And, the kind of, I'm also a former Sam Harris kind of, I guess, fanboy. And I guess listening to you just like dunk on him enough just kind of made me realize, this guy kind of is this like a whiner, trust fund baby, it's like always playing the victim card. And, it was right around when he started referring to himself and, Majid Nawaz and Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson as this like intellectual dark web, that just, my initial reaction to that was just like, I cringed at that, that
it's
was
embarrassing.
Just,
so smart. It's embarrassing.
It's embarrassing because especially from my point of view, I'm somebody who used to, when I was in high school, I used to go on, like 4chan and, all that kind of shit. So, I was very familiar with that kind of stuff. So when he started saying shit like that, I was just like, oh man, just stop, man. It's like, it just kind of made me realize just like how flawed his perspectives were. And, you kind of just like made me see that even more.
I mean, I've got this book that's going to be out in the summer about not just it's a critique of the IDW, but it's also a kind of cosmopolitan socialist answer to a lot of the questions that arise around the IDW. So it includes the symptom, this power, this, because it's like, this whole popularity of this thing is obviously a symptom of bigger problems. That's why you would live in a society where people want to read, Jordan Peterson or something. But also, it is interesting though in terms of just kind of micro, like even in short-term history. And like when Sam Harris came on the scene, he was writing, both that there was an enormous amount of fear and lack of information and just sort of rank stupidity about Muslims. So on one hand, his just kind of like aggressive bigotry towards them, along with the pseudo-sophisticated thought experiments and the substitution for like word games and hypotheticals over policy and history could work. But then on the other hand, it was also like, it was just so simple. It was just, I'm an atheist, and to be fair, I get, and, we always say this, I know that these issues don't matter as much to me as it does to other people in some ways. I certainly matter about people being brought up in religious environments that are harmful to them, and I don't want religion of any kind legislating for sure. But I don't know if the president says God bless America, I don't have this does not put me into conniptions for days. Just me,
right? Yeah.
But that being said,
maybe high school Richard Dawkins viewing Austin might have cared about that, but fortunately I grew out of that.
Right. So I just but it was just interesting though that he was riding this really open mileage of, on one hand, these really ahistorical, vicious, stupid stuff about Islam and Muslims on a policy and historical arena, and then on the other hand, just sort of like this open and super simple lane of just like, hey, I'm an atheist, as actually, ironically, basically a form of identity politics, if we're being blunt about it.
Yeah, it is.
And
it
then,
really is.
and even then I didn't really understand it because Hitchens gave you the same thing, but Hitchens was fun, and Hitchens is a great writer, and all the rest of it, and a raconteur. But then now it's like, obviously he's got his own weird intellectual fixations, and that's why he gets into the race stuff. And he's a bizarre guy. Still haven't kind of figured him out. But I think
that was also when I started falling off the train. I saw you had Charles Murray gone there, and I was like, whoa, what are you doing, man? It was just kind of one of those moments I put my hands on my head and I'm like, what are you doing, dude? Like, this is.
But for those
not
guys,
someone you should be associating with.
Definitely. And for Sam Harris, I think for those guys, that as Matt would say, it's like, the difference is on the left, you historicize, and the right, you mythologize. And some people also might not like this, but if you use scientism as an ideology, as a distinct from scientific method, that becomes its own form of mythology. And people like Sam Harris were boxed in because they didn't have the intellectual capacity or empathy to grow into the conversations that people are having today. And by the way, I'm not saying there still might be strong disagreements. I'm not saying like become a particular type of left or whatever. But all he did was just kind of become, in that whole scene, just sort of degraded into lazy reactionary politics because there wasn't the emotional empathy or intellectual capacity to take on the issues of the day. It was all just quite literally reactive. And there wasn't anything novel to add to any of the conversations. So that's how it worked out. I'm glad you found us. Thanks, brother. That's awesome. It's always
We're getting more and more of those calls.
Yes.
And it's sort of making me revise our position, which was like, you don't really convert people. We're getting to the point where I think people do, and you have to think about the way people approach these things for the first time. It's sort of how people watch local news thinking they're being informed about their community, but they're not. They're being informed about like whatever the local police department has to give them, and whatever like the meteorology is, and maybe some news, and then whatever decent video that one of their reporters could wrangle up, and it might be even from like a national corporate headquarters. So, but people still think they're getting informed, and they leave watching the news as if they have been informed.
Right.
And the IDW is all about like, let's have these conversations. We're gonna have these hard conversations. We're gonna get into the nitty gritty. We're gonna love nuance, and they're selling themselves. And people, if they don't know what that stuff actually looks like, what actually getting into like historicizing stuff, they might think that that's it. And then you get that sort of like Dunning-Kruger effect where like we're the brain geniuses. We've thought through all this stuff rationally, but really, no, you've been living inside like a walled garden where you're pretending to do all that stuff.
Precisely. But that's also where the Ben Burgess critique of the left comes in, where it's like, I mean, look, I've no problem condemning them on their ethics, and I do. But also actually taking the time to dissect and really pick apart their arguments, and even also acknowledge areas of vulnerability where we're falling short that they're exploiting, disingenuously, of course, but really taking it apart. And again, I could tell you this, yes, in addition to the calls, I've had plenty of other anecdotes where it's like it was some combination of a failing of certain kind of pop forms of leftism to deal with, certain, not even arguments, just a kind of off-putting sort of ethos, combined with a sort of fake, the pseudo-intellectualism of that scene. And then as simple as, yeah, but then I, started watching you guys, or I found 0 books or something yeah, I'm done. Those guys are schmucks. Okay, Angel, I heard that Steve King brought Diamond or Silk to the State of the Union. I wonder how they chose. Did she just say, after everything Trump said? How much did Steve King pay her? These are all legitimate questions.
I think it was a coin toss, actually.
It sounds about right. Colin from Nebraska, I was discussing the Green New Deal, how to pay for it dilemma with my roommate. He asked me that while adding that many of the resources to transport high-speed rail parts involve coal and oil. I tried to encourage him to look past the money aspects, but had trouble with the coal and oil part. How would you say it'd be better to use coal and oil to implement the Green New Deal versus ignoring solutions to help human society? I mean, I don't think even people who have the most aggressive plans for climate, I think if somebody told you literally within 48 hours we could stop using coal and oil, it's not even not feasible. It's just not, unless we just decided that we're just going to sit around, which maybe we should decide to do that. But yes, even the most aggressive transition is going to involve some extractive processes to do these things. There's no doubt. Now, maybe there's some good technical answers about how to do that in a much lower impact way, which I don't know. Kentucky Fried Comrade, now that we're past the right-wing challenge to Pelosi as Speaker, with Pelosi's snubbing of the Green New Deal, as well as clarification that she was clapping Trump's statement, can we discuss the medium-long need for find a future Speaker who actually represents a left agenda? I don't know if it's at the top of the list right now, but supposedly, didn't Nancy Pelosi say that she's done in 2020? Didn't she already say that? Or am I totally mishearing that?
I thought it was 2 terms she said she would commit to.
2 terms. Yes. Somebody from the left should be House Speaker. The much bigger problem in my estimation that happened in this last Congress, I don't even remember what the title was. Maybe it was like conference chair or something. But
4th seat.
The 4th seat going to Hakeem Jeffries over Barbara Lee, it really sticks in my craw.
That was a signal for sure.
That was a signal. So yes. But the real way you do that, I'm sorry, I'm not adding new insight, but keep getting more left-wing people in Congress and then having them organize for power. Local pizza historian, what do you guys think about Kamala Harris's shamelessly plugging her Converse when Vans is where it's at? Talk about how do you do, fellow kids. I thought she really did herself in with the Converse. I'm your Cuckleberry. Leftist friends tell me that they're hesitant to support Bernie or Warren because they want to win and they think Kamala Harris, etc., have a better chance. What makes you all say that anyone can beat Trump? The argument I hear is that everyone thought Hillary would win. Well, I don't. Okay,
this sounds like a Jacob Wall.
This just sounds like. Look, first of all, you should tell your friends that they're way in their head and they need to just get outside. The reason, honestly, the reason that take a walk, splash some water on their face. The reason that I say it is because every historical marker, okay, to be honest, if I was trusting my gut in 2016 more, I would have been less confident about Hillary Clinton winning than I projected I was. To be honest with you, it always felt to me atmospherically and looking at the country like this could be a real fucking problem. That being said, and I don't say this as an excuse for their catastrophic campaign strategy, she won. The polling was not really that far off base. It wasn't like the poll said Hillary Clinton is going to win and then Trump won a 5 million person popular vote. He got... And this is where, look, Steve Bannon, I think, is frankly mostly full of shit. But one thing that he was totally right about was essentially we need to flip a highly geographically specific amount of seats in this part of the electoral table. And they did it. So, okay, people need to don't underlearn the lessons of Hillary, but don't overlearn and have the wrong lessons. Second part is Trump is consistently polling under 50%. Historically, if you were in your 3rd year heading into re-election and you're that low, it's not good. That is not good news. Now, conversely, the economy is quote unquote doing well, but we already know that doesn't really reflect full reality. And so, in fact, ironically, Trump, who got mileage in that broad bullshit populist way, it was a better position to be in 2016 to say America isn't already great. There's a lot more that needs to be done. But guess what he has to do now? I mean, he's going to have to go to all these other places where he stoked misdirected populist anger. In addition, of course, he'll double up on the racism and xenophobia, which is horrifying and potent and the base of Republican politics, but not enough. Again, it's been proven again and again. It's not enough to win a national election. Bill Fletcher said that to me within weeks of Trump's election. He said, this is catastrophic, but you need to see in the vote totals that this is not a majority right now. So and then what is he going to do with the populism stuff? Is he going to keep railing? I mean, he'll try maybe, but he's also got to brag about his record. And then, insofar as it matters, every single frontline Democrat leads him in the polls. So, I mean, and I say this to my fellow Bernie people: don't make the argument that only Bernie could beat him. It's fucking dumb. Yeah. From all available evidence, any of these candidates could beat him. Now, I have a couple of candidates that I would be a little bit less confident about than others. But honestly, none of that is ideological, right? Like, I think Bernie could definitely beat him, and I think Kamala Harris could definitely beat him, and I think Joe Biden could definitely beat him. And I think, I think pretty much all the frontline ones could definitely beat him. Then there's some other ones like, legitimately, I don't know. You really start digging the barrel here. I don't know about Mike Bloomberg. Okay, I don't know about Terry McAuliffe, right? But it is just, every side of that equation is not the conversation to be having right now. Get out of your house. Tell your friends politely and with love to go take a walk. All right, let's play two more quick pieces of sound. Trump misspeaks a lot, but was this a Freudian slip?
Many of our greatest strides, from gaining our independence to abolition of civil rights, to extending the vote for women, have been led by people of faith and started in prayer.
Abolition of
Did he
civil
just
rights.
not want to say the word slavery and correct it to civil rights or something?
Well, a lot of this speech was about trafficking, and they were calling it human slavery. So I think he was like, "Oh, maybe that's a
Wait,
mistake."
I thought, how can it be abolished if we're talking about it right now?
Let's see. Let's do this. Let's play clip number 8. This is important. This is wonky, but this is important. This is I would say this is a good preset for how to get really specific on with candidates as they run for office. And we already see this, of course. We saw the catastrophic talk with Nancy Pelosi's policy advisor undermining Medicare for All. Then we saw the terrible move by the Pod Save guy trying to make it a generic thing versus a specific thing. Abdul Al-Sayed, obviously, we very enthusiastically supported his run for governor of Michigan. He ran a good campaign. Unfortunately, came up short, but this is a very young, very talented guy who is going to keep contributing for quite some time, and he's doing it right now. Here he is on Rebel Headquarters, the TYT show, explaining the difference between the Center for American Progress's proposal on Medicare Extra versus single-payer universal health care.
How popular Medicare for All is. It's polling 60 to 70% depending upon the poll that you're looking at. And a lot of folks who are cozy with the insurance industry are thinking, well, how can we have our cake and eat it too? How can we make sure that these health insurers that, by the way, are big donors to Democratic and Republican campaigns, how do we keep them happy? And so they're taking the name Medicare for All and they're putting extra stuff in it. One plan that's pushed forward by the Center for American Progress is called Medicare Extra for All. And you'd think that if it's Medicare Extra, it'd be better than Medicare, right? Because it's extra. That's not the case at all. What it does, in effect, is brings back the idea of the public option. If you think back to the time when we were debating the Affordable Care Act, there was a question about the public option and ended up getting stripped. The Obama administration couldn't push that through. What Medicare Extra for All is in effect a public option. It allows you to buy into Medicare if you're a company or if you're an individual. Here's the problem, though, that keeps us with Medicare for some, because, of course, some people aren't going to be able to afford it. The big problem we have in our society right now is that Medicaid covers folks who make up to 133% of poverty, which is not very much at all. And then after that, there's this big donut hole between when the people can actually have access because they can afford healthcare on the exchanges. And then, of course, there's Medicare for people over the age of 65. Medicare Extra is not going to really solve that problem. All it does is introduce a competitive, publicly funded or publicly subsidized public option. And that's not enough. We need to make sure that anything that we call Medicare for All implies that it covers everybody. You shouldn't have to buy in. You shouldn't have to worry about whether or not your employer got it. You shouldn't have to worry about how much money you make or whether or not you can afford it. Right now, we know Medicare for All is so popular because people get the basic idea. It's Medicare for everybody. Medicare Extra won't be Medicare for everybody. It'll be, like you said, Medicare for some. And it's not going to deliver on the promise of Medicare for All. So there's a real political challenge there. And like you said, look, the reason Medicare for All matters so much is because it breaks the kind of collusion power that big insurance has with big healthcare. And if we just had another private system or Medicare for some, it's not going to do that. So we're not going to get the major cost savings. We're going to miss out on being able to provide healthcare for everybody.
So that's exactly right. That's well put. And it's something to have a lot of precision about when you talk to candidates. I mean, we've seen, obviously, the two famous examples so far. Kamala Harris had an excellent answer at the CNN town hall on Medicare for All about private. Let's move past it. Let's go. We got to get this done. The next day, she reversed herself. Cory Booker came out, said he supports Medicare for All, because, of course, he's a co-sponsor of Bernie's bill in the Senate, which would lead to real Medicare for All. But then the next day, his team clarified, no, he does not want to get rid of private insurance. It needs to happen. And not only does it need to happen, the actual further reaches of the conversation is what next part of the healthcare sector becomes public, so that pharma, as an example, which just privately sort of accesses and absorbs public commons. Most innovation in medical research is publicly funded and delivered, and then pharma profits off of it almost essentially as intellectual property and marketing companies. We need to stop that too and put healthcare in democracy's hands across the board.
There's some very simple facts that anytime someone who's talking about dismantling this industry that you can just point to and prove that it's been a failure and that it needs to be seriously reformed. None of this like kowtowing BS. So 62% of bankruptcies are due to medical debt. 70% of those people with that debt have insurance. Yep. That is astounding.
Yep. Done.
And also 1 in 3 fundraisers on GoFundMe are for medical debt. That's not a functioning system.
We need single-payer universal health care. The case is overwhelmingly moral, and I want to make it on those terms. It's also, if you want to go there, it is the obvious, indisputed. I mean, there are both social, political, historical, but also bureaucratic and logistical reasons why every single other industrialized country has some version of this to greater or lesser degrees, and that the ones that perform best are more and more public.
And the Chapo guys made a good point on this, talking about the Johns. If you're already hedging on what your plan is and your politics, you're not in the room yet. You can't act like you're in the room, because that's what we did in 2016 and lost because there was no driving message behind Hillary Clinton's candidacy.
You're not in the room, you're on the trail. You're calling from an 832 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
My name is David, and I'm calling from Austin, Texas.
Hey, David, what's going on? What's on your mind? Yep, what's on your mind?
Hey, I have been in pro-Palestinian politics for a long time, since the Lebanon war or the July war in 2006.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been very distressing to see where the pro-Palestinian movement is going with BDS.
Why? Explain.
BDS has shown a lot of evidence that it's ineffective.
Why?
And that it's not helping.
How?
Well, if you, foreign direct investment to Israel is at an all-time high. Israel's GDP is looking good.
So wait.
Diplomatic...
Hold it. So are you saying that the BDS should be even more aggressive and effective, or are you saying it shouldn't be used as a tool because Israel still has a lot of FDI? What are you saying?
I'm saying, one, I'm certainly for boycotts, divestments, and sanctions of settlement products. But
you're somebody who because we don't have much time, so I just got to clarify this. You're somebody, if I understand you correctly, you are on the side of some type of two-state solution. You don't feel comfortable.
Absolutely.
You don't feel comfortable with a boycott that takes on Israel as a whole, and you want stuff that only has to do. Okay, not totally. What?
I want something that's effective. I am for a two-state solution, and that's probably the main thing. I don't see that advocating for one state or for the return of 5 million Palestinian refugees is going to lead to a solution anytime soon. It's going to allow Israel to continue the occupation.
All right, so here's
the
the answer to what you're saying, okay? And I'm somebody who supports. I, at the end of the day, support a full binational democracy for everybody for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, ultimately,
I do too.
Right. So no, that wouldn't be a two-state solution. But that being said,
well,
hold on. I'm going to answer your question. But I'm not. I mean, there is an ideological component to it, but there's also the component that Israel has made a two-state solution literally impossible logistically. So because of just never-ending expansion of settlements, and so the fact that we could even, frankly. And the whole Gaza spin of like, oh, well, we took out settlements in Gaza. No, Israel controls Gaza 100%. Israel has Gaza as a prison under Israeli policy. So my position, I mean, look, you say BDS doesn't work. Nothing has worked. Literally nothing has worked. So there's one potential posture here. And I have different feelings about it because in general, like, I think sanctions are a form of violence, and there's some types of boycotts and lack of engagement I have problems with. I think people generally should travel in between places. I think that people should be doing academic work together. I think that there are, things that are important and healthy, and if I oppose them elsewhere, I oppose them as applied to Israel. That being said, the closest analog to Israel is definitely apartheid South Africa. And ultimately, that was the strategy that helped transition apartheid out of apartheid to democracy. Now, it's going to be much harder in Israel's case, both because Israel has obviously the unending full support of the United States, and also because Israel itself is pivoting. So that when people like Ehud Olmert and Ehud Barak said, hey, we can't be an apartheid state, it's bad for our brand, the right in Israel and Netanyahu saying we can build alliances with Hungary. We can build alliances with the new fascists in Europe. Certainly the Republican Party voters don't give a fuck about racial oppression. So it's a very hard question, and I don't know all the strategic answers, but I do know BDS is part of it on some level. I appreciate the call. That's going to be the final call of the day because we are running kind of tight. Let me see. Maybe I'll take... Yeah, I can't get to everybody, but I will take one final call just because they've been on for 70 minutes. You're calling from a 917 area code with the final call of the day. 917, are you there? Ooh. Went out of my way for you, 917. Yeah. You blew it. Okay. All right. I will take one other final call of the day. You're calling from a 413 area code with the final call of the day. Are you there?
Hello, this is me, damn it, and don't you forget it, boy.
Okay, what's on your mind?
Yeah. Hi. Yeah, Rachel, great. So great to see in Amherst for the next few hours.
Awesome.
So fab to see you all. Oh, man. Okay, I was going to say one real quick thing. I really hope that we will hear more impressions of Senator Ed Markey, given that he's on the Green New Deal.
That's a legit request.
Epic voice. And second thing that is a whole other can of worms for another time, digging into foreign policy nuance or the absolute lack thereof of Ro Khanna. That I could talk about for hours, but maybe another time.
Okay, let's focus on getting Ro Khanna to call for freeing Lula, though. I'm more interested in that.
Oh yeah, no, I even gave a snappy reply to you and saying because Lula was a fan of, he was tight with Obama. Would Khanna would he even lift a finger? Okay, that was kind of me being cynical, but just saying that, I mean, for his anti-interventionist policy, it's like just as a philosophy, it's really great for Yemen because that's just, you need to be a jackhammer on that just to stop genocide. But in so many other cases, there's a lot of nuance that he misses out on. And
do you think I hear what you're saying. I mean, I think he can change. He's even we've chatted over Ukraine on Twitter, and I mean, I would be bullshitting if I said I had any reason to any connection to why he doesn't really call it Maidan a coup anymore. It's more like he just doesn't hang out with Jimmy Dore the way he used to. But I feel like he's someone with a lot of great things going in domestic policy, and in some areas like Yemen, he's really, really a valuable voice and actor. But I just think that he could do more. He could be better. Figuring out how that works. I hear what you're saying, and obviously I agree with you that he's a smart guy. And I think honestly, regardless of particular positions, it's great. I mean, it's awesome you're engaging with him, and it's awesome that it's great that the team is responding. I will say though, I do think that especially in a situation like Venezuela, the job profile of a congressperson is different, and you have to oppose what's happening there, period. Right? So it's...
I like Bernie's take on that, because I don't know, maybe you'd call it
But Bernie's take is still
I feel like he recognizes nuance. Yeah.
Yeah, but Bernie's take is still opposing it. And for what it's worth, I don't see it. And I think the Ukraine example is more complicated, and we just can't get into that right now. But I do think even there, right. I was somebody who had a lot of, of course I oppose NATO expansion, blah, 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 all the things that I oppose, and everybody knows I oppose, but I was much more in that case because honestly, it was actually the inverse, right? This is Russia's version of their Monroe Doctrine.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So I was much more willing to kind of put out that critique. That being said,
sure.
Of course, I don't want to ramp up arms shipments to Ukraine, and also I'm quite receptive. The U.S.-backed Ukrainian government is not one I support either at all.
Sure.
So but I think that Ro Khanna, especially right now, within a span of a couple of weeks. Look, if Ro Khanna, and this would have been cool if he started talking about Venezuela a year ago, and he said, "Look, there's an economic warfare going on there. This government has achieved some great things under Chavez, and it's also got some serious problems and some serious real failings. There needs to be a broad diplomatic process that is not an intervention, but is a co-facilitation to create something better that preserves the gains of the Bolivarian Revolution, but also reopens democracy." That would have been the best case scenario. But right now, with literally what's happening, the bottom line he needs to convey is no coup, no coup, no coup. And I just think that that's the bottom line right now.
All right. Okay, I was going to say Syria, but that can be later.
That can be later. You're coming with all of the good stuff here, right, in the last couple of minutes.
Yeah, well, I know. I was getting pizza at Antonio's when I called you up, and I've been waiting online for an hour and a half since then. But it's okay, for the best pizza in the world.
Awesome. So. All right. Thank you for the call. Much appreciated.
All right. Sure.
Props to Amherst and
all right,
Antonio's.
Thanks so much.
Have a good. Okay. Thank you so much. Thanks to everybody who came to the TMBS live show. All right, folks. Final call of the day. I'm going to read a few more. I mean, that was the final call of the day. I'm sorry, not to get anybody's hopes up. I'm going to read a few IMs, and then we are out of here. Anthony from Baltimore. Hey, Michael, given your given your track record of dunking on Sam Harris, just want to let you know that some French social psychologists are studying what they call the new secularism. It's being studied in a similar vein as Bob Altemeyer's work on the new right authoritarianism. A recent study demonstrated new secularism's explanatory relationship to social dominance and prejudice towards North Africans. If that research is in English, I need to find it. Maybe you could email. Thank you. That's enormously helpful and interesting. Nick from Manitoba. Easy Wagwan, my dude. Keep slaying the haters. Booyaka Shah. I like Nick from Manitoba. He keeps it very positive. Madison, did you guys see the Sean Spicer drunk clip? No, it does seem really funny, but we'll have fun with that tomorrow. Glass and Gold, Michael, it'd be great to have Mike Racine back on TMBS again. That show was hilarious. Yes, definitely. He was at the live show. Mo Brains, Michael, I know so many young people who join the military for lack of education or economic opportunity. If they had another option, they would take it. Imagine what a CCC or WPA program in service of a Green New Deal would do. Absolutely. I love how it would be amazing. I love how Kamala Harris touts her support for Medicare expansion at the Green New Deal, but won't support a redistributive tax policy to pay for it. Huge red flag there. Yes, indeed. Okay. Let me see. Got to make this good. Okay. The final IM of the day. Of course, apologies. Cannot get to all of these. Let's see. Okay, I'll just end with this. Jabbo, which Democratic candidates oppose BDS? All of them. I love you, but get into this world. Yes, definitely all of them. Maybe that will change.
Those not named Ilhan Omar or Rashida
I would also say,
I don't even know if Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar are supporting BDS right now.
I think on the BDS stuff, like if it was so ineffective, there probably wouldn't be so many efforts to defang it.
Indeed. Thank you, everybody. We're back here tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid.